Rebecca Clifford. Thank you for some really interesting
Louder.
talk. Sorry, I should have learned before, but I keep doing that. Rosemary's addressed this, but I just wanted to come back to that idea that I think we've got a lot of mileage out of, which is the idea of the model reader, the model listener. And I wondered, also, not just for Rosemary, but for Amir, what you think the digital turn does for reconceptualizing the model reader and the model listener as well.
Okay, thank you for the three papers. So I want to focus specifically on something that Amir raised, and I'm really happy that you raised sort of this idea of the archive and archival considerations, because we haven't discussed this much yet, and I think it's a really important point that even if we're talking about sort of digitization and fascination with digitizing, we're still talking about the creation of vast archives and all of the considerations that come into that, and some of them subjective in terms of how material is grouped together, how information is grouped together. There's a wonderful new book by Lisa Leff, The Archive Thief, where she really gets into sort of the arbitrary nature in which archives are created. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of more about this metadata, both in the way that the Visual History Archive sort of conducts its index, and I'm sure Wolf can talk about this too, but how grouping together all these things affects the ways in which we search it, access to information, the fact that there are choices that are made to group all of these huge numbers of either useful books or testimonies together. So again, the shape of the archive and how that affects our ability to interpret, engage with the information.
I would like to address the issue of using names. Some archives are very careful in some countries about using names. We are just now publishing a testimony collection of children. We had a big argument with IVO. They wanted us to change the names. They said this is what sociologists do. We said we're historians, and we want the names in, and it will come out with the names. And again, if you digitize a testimony or a e-score book which was read by 20 people, and then you put it on the web, suddenly a lot of issues come up. And so why work so hard if you can't, you won't go and erase the names, and you can't erase the name of the person who gave the testimony, otherwise it's useless. So what do we do with this issue, apart from closing the things again?
These are all important questions. I don't think I'll be able to give substantial answers, but as for the model reader, the one thing that comes to mind for me is that the e-score books and the testimonies were really produced in a time where the reader was something else than it is now. The reader, the listener, the viewer, whatever we choose to call these people. So I think the question is really open. It's very, very hard to say how much or in what way the text can relate to this new kind of ways to interact with it. I think, again, if I go back to McLuhan, that the technology will shape this connection, but as we are in the middle of this process, I don't know if we're in the middle or in the beginning, I don't know where we are within this process of enjoying new technologies in which we consume information, so it's really hard to say, well, it will lead. The one thing I would like to say that I usually mention when I speak to people about the digital environment is that I really believe that the book or the paper is also here to stay, because there are definitely qualities in the paper form which are not yet possible to transmit in the digital arena, and it's not going to go away so fast, so don't worry. About the archive, again, it's a huge question, but only a few things that to spring to mind. So there's a Canadian archivist, he's passed away recently, Terry Cook, and I just remember the quote by him. He said that historiography doesn't start with the published book, but with the muddy waters of archival decisions, and I really learned that this is true. So archivists call these actions the appraisal, so the acquisition of materials, the decisions of where to put it, Do we provide finding aids? What will not be kept in an archive when new materials come in? What do we digitize and what not? I mean, these are all huge decisions that many times historians or other users are not always very familiar with, but are extremely important, I believe, especially again in this time and place where a lot of materials are being reconnected with through digitization. And one more point about the archive, I think a very important role of an archive, because today historians can use many other sources, also outside of the archive. In the 19th century, the archive was the place where the historian goes to. Today, historians, especially the ones who do social memory, well, there's many other resources to use. But there is something in the archive of stabilizing the record. So once a record or a testimony or whatever goes into an archive, there's a certain legitimacy and trustworthiness that it receives, which I think that is really very much a place of an archive, although this can be further complicated as well if we look at archives in community settings, where memory rather than history plays also a very important role. And as for Boaz's comment, I think there's we're still in the time of looking for answers, and there's many models which are possible, and decisions are being made either way.
Yes, this is fabulous. One of the perspectives that's missing at our group is the one of the librarian and archivist. It would be very good to maybe next time to recruit some librarians, because they do hold, I think, some of the answers to this, because they do the finding aids, they do the categorization, all that kind of matter. So they're just wonderful. In terms of the thing about the names, I wasn't quite sure what you meant. Was that censoring the names? Mm-hmm. Well, this is not such a new problem, because I remember once interviewing Beryl Kahn. He was an editor of several Yizkor books, and he believed that every story should be in the books, even if somebody did something bad. And the Landsmannschaft, someone said, well, no, we want to protect some of our people. We don't want to expose them. So this question of who should be written in, who should be written out is ongoing. It's basic. It's very basic. It's very basic. And then one thing I didn't want to say, one thing I learned about readership is that when I learned about this online print-on-demand versions, I said to one of the librarians at the museum in Washington, well, doesn't this mean then that the books no longer have the same value, because now they're available as many times as you want to print them? And so she said, no, they're still artifacts. The printed books are still something else. And in terms of readers then, these printed books are really very valuable for developing new collections or adding to gaps in current collections. So in terms of generating more readers, you do have that.
The question is addressed to the first speaker, Professor Łysak, and that is due to the influence of Landsmann on the other works. You have mentioned him at the end of your speech, but what was the practical significance of his work and his contribution to history? That's the one. The comment is, I cannot link with him, I mean Landsmann, his second film about Marmorstein, and the lecture that you made, Professor Theophilakis, and actually at the end of the day we have missed not having him, Marmorstein, in the trials, but you can't ignore the huge and fantastic work that Landsmann did with him. And the last one is a reflection, and that is the significance and impact of these testimonies that were filmed either by video or digitalized, in the entire significance of what we do remember. And I take myself as a self-reflection. I wouldn't have remembered the comment about Marmorstein and Landsmann unless it would have been so deep remembered in my memory thanks to what I saw in that film.
So I have a quick question. I have a question I would like to ask Amir. I had some experience to work with testimonies in Canadian archives, but with Ukrainian testimonies. And I have found some tendency that there were some projects, and sometimes it had some political reasons. For instance, it was collection in the 1960s. Some Ukrainian communities were trying to whitewash themselves and were trying to collect memories of Ukrainian helpers during the Holocaust. And so on. It was collection of memories of who survived during the famine, 1932-1933. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it's a question. What tendency is possible to find out in collection of memories in Jewish community in Canada during these 70 years? What was reasons when it was the biggest interest, and is it possible to find out any political reasons from outside the community? Thank you.
So Ali raised, I think, an interesting point which I want to expand on. So when we group together in the digitization project, we create an archive, grouping together. There is something happening which I would call like giving voice to some means at the same time eclipsing others. To give you an example, is when my students use the visual history archive, they use usually the testimonies which start with A and B, their names, because they are the first ones appearing. So we talked in the Shaw Foundation about we need to actually establish random search results so that others also get respected. Yeah? But I think the problem is actually much bigger, because if we think that more and more digitization takes place, not only testimonies but other materials, this is, and people are getting used to kind of acquiring digital literacy, they actually also lose kind of the old literacy, because the digital repositories are much easier to use, easier accessible from everywhere. So you actually save trips to an archive, and people tend to use more and more these digital libraries instead of archives. So there's, again, you have voice to certain documents, but you eclipse the other one, you silence the other ones. And I think this is a problem for the future.
Digitalizing means for me that it's really accessible from everywhere, but it's not the case. For testimony, you always have to go to certain place to have an access. For the Shoah Foundation, we have an access in Europe at the University of Salzburg in Berlin. Or if you want to have the Fortunov archive, you have to go to Berlin. But you cannot have any information about what we are going to find. And I'm looking for hidden children. So I would like to check before traveling.
You can search online everything, the whole archive.
But not in all the archives.
No, really. The whole archive is online.
Not the Fortunov archive.
Oh, the Fortunov archive.
Yes, okay. Not everywhere. So now I heard about Canada. So Canada might be interesting for me, because some hidden children from France could have moved to Canada. So which possibility do I have from Austria to find out if your archive is interesting for me or not? I'm so Toronto is a nice city, but you know, I could if I stay 1 week, 2 days, or 2 months. So, and I think in this case we have to make a lot of effort, because even if you make some searching, if you want to have a testimony, you have to have a certain place to have an access to that. I think after registration, it should be possible at any university to have an access to digital archive.
Okay, so just a few points, and again, I'll be very, very quick, and I'll be happy to speak more when we finish here. So about archives in Canada, yeah, I mean, in Western Canada, there's a very big Ukrainian and Polish communities that came before the war, and also after the war, a few others joined them, and it's a very complicated landscape. You have to really go into Canadian archival history as well, because sometimes in the 60s, Canada adopted the concept of total archives, where the government and provincial archives would collect also community memories, and special people were appointed in Ottawa to reach these collections and create them. and there were lots of tensions there. So I know a little bit about it, but this is probably something we can speak not to this level. About Wolf's remark, so there's a paper by Todd Bresner who speaks about really how do you keep the respect towards the individual testimony when you encounter it in a database of 50,000 testimonies. I mean, how can we really work with these issues as well? And for the last question, so I don't have specific answers, but it just comes to show the importance of what I mentioned as metadata, which is basically information about information. So when we deal with such huge archives, okay, we really need to know how to look for them. The thing in the digital environment, in the testimony itself, you can only access it according to what people targeted or indexed it, or the metadata that they produced. So you can search for it online, again, not with all archives, but still probably the best thing would be to pack a bag and come to Canada. I'll be happy to host you.
Okay, so the influence of Landsman. I could give two answers, and a simple one and a complicated one. I guess we only have time for the simple one. So when we look at the influence of a certain director, Brad Prager in his book writes about the Holocaust documentaries are not a genre, but they are a system of films referring to one another. So let us now look at what's specific about Landsman. Location shots, interviews, ban on archival materials. There were location shots in Polish documentaries about the war before Landsman. There were interviews in Polish documentaries before Landsman. When it comes to the use of archival documents, Polish documentary filmmakers in the 1960s were pioneers, like word pioneers in using found photography and found footage. So there were certain elements that were already there, and when it comes to Landsman, and this is my perspective, Landsman did not invent anything in terms of documentary film. His film is just a question of scale. He did something that others already did before, but to a different scale. So when it comes to history of Polish documentaries about the Holocaust, the major influence is Alain Resnais. And this is an influence that was already acknowledged in the 1960s. There were film critics that said, we learned a lot from Alain Resnais. Night and Fog is the film that we are trying to emulate as a film industry. So unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you what happened really after Landsman. One more thing about Shoah. For the majority of Polish audience, and for many Polish filmmakers, Shoah was not a film until, I would say, early 1990s. Because when it was released, there was only an edit that was 1 hour. So, I mean, you could learn something about the film, but it wasn't really the film itself. So when Holocaust documentaries in Poland gained momentum in the 1990s, that was the time when Polish filmmakers saw the film. So they were already doing something similar to Landsman without actually having seen the film. Significance of film testimony. So when it comes to Świadkowie, I just learned that Woziński still has the outtakes. So, and this is something that really fascinates me, not only because of the outtakes to Shoah that were available online. I checked recently; they are no longer available online. So we probably have to go to DC to watch the outtakes, and maybe that's like a temporary break. But I see documentary filmmaking as creating a cultural archive. So it's not only using what Nazis filmed, it's not only using what Jewish photographers photographed, but if you look at the 70 years of production of films, this is a new archive. Unfortunately, it's, well, there's a problem with access. I mean, if you want to see the outtakes, so for example, The Word at War, Imperial War Museum has all the outtakes, but you cannot use them because they don't have the money to make them available.
Okay, so thank you very much for the speakers.